presentation. Our guest is Phil Stade. He's the director of the Prouts Neck Historical Society and a regular volunteer at Scarborough Historical Society. And his presentation this afternoon is Prouts Neck Highlights. Phil?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for making it out here today. This is some fun stuff. I'm going to be covering a couple of different areas. And firstly, let me ask you, how many of you have been out to Prouts Neck? Anybody not been out yet? Been out? Oh, yeah, we got one person who hasn't been out here. Okay. Anyway, you'll be in for a treat. We're even going to take you on a little aerial flyover. Not only this year, but long ago. So we're going to do a few things today. We're going to be talking about, I'm going to give you a little overview about the Prouts Neck Historical Society. And then we're going to look at Indian settler conflicts in the early days. And then we're going to look at then and now. And this is actually from an aerial point of view from 1939 to 2019. Exactly 80 years apart. Kind of fun stuff here. And by the way, audience participation is highly encouraged. Okay, so anytime you got any questions, pop them up right away, because we'll probably forget otherwise. So, first a word from our sponsors, and this is the Prouts Neck Historical Society, which I am the executive director. That means I do the work. These are the other directors with us here, including Rodney over here on the left. I won't go through everybody's names here, but here we all are. And it's a wonderful little organization. Several of us live in the area, and several are from obviously Prouts Neck is mostly a summer community, but more and more it's becoming a real lively place even in the wintertime. And here's some of the stuff we do. So the main vehicle, if you will, for our historical work is the Prouts Necker. This is an email that goes out every month. Today's issue went out today, this morning, usually on Sunday, the first Sunday of the month. And I highly encourage you, if you'd like to subscribe, by all means do. If you may notice here, it looks a little bit like the New Yorker, so we came up with the name the Prouts Necker, and use their font as well. So it's a lot of fun, and one of the really cool things about doing this as an email, sorry Sarah Jane, and others who don't get email, but we can do videos as well. So every issue has got at least one or two videos in it from all the way back to as far as 1921. Some pretty cool stuff. And by the way, if you'd like, come over here and you can put your email address right here and we'll add you to the list if you're not on there already. And while we're at it, by the way, one of the other things we'll talk about just a sec are two books that we've done. The first is Prouts Neck History Highlights, which is kind of what we're talking about today, book one, and then Some People of Prouts Neck. Just come up and flip through there if you're interested. They're $50 each, and they are expensive, I'm afraid. We get them done through Shutterfly, so they're kind of one-offs, if you will. We're hoping that the next time we do a book run, we'll be able to find a cheaper way to get them produced. But they're very special if you want to really learn about Prouts Neck, especially some of the history, some great work there. And we'll be doing a third book in another couple of years about the houses of Prouts, which will be interesting. So, the website is proutsneckhistory.org. And again, that you can find out up here and by asking us. If you go on there, you can go back through all the time periods and see all kinds of images, stories, and some really fun information there. The books, as I said, we also have a Prouts Neck Sing book. Some of you may be aware that on Sunday evenings during the summer at the Yacht Club, we have a sing-along with about 150 people come together and do old-fashioned sings just like they used to do in the hotels 100 years ago. And some really great old music there. We also have a variety of posters available from events and from the Prouts Necker and Some People of Prouts. And these are some aerial views that we'll be looking at in a moment, which are now in posters. We also produce posters then for anybody who needs them. We have a lot of digital images. We do this all at cost. We don't really charge extra for this because we get wonderful donations from the community, and that's how we fund all the work that we do. We also do an awful lot of interviews. We record events such as the stage events at the Prouts Neck Country Club. This is actually our video camera here, which is used by the Scarborough Historical Society for recording events. And we have, most importantly, a huge digital collection. We're very much a digital society. Scarborough Historical Society is the place to go if you want to see stuff and touch it. It's fabulous. But at Prouts Neck, especially as a summer community, most of the year it's not even open, it's much better to be digital. So we've got thousands and thousands of images and videos and audio and stories and such. As you can see, hundreds of images, hundreds of videos. We scan books. We've got some book scanners here and some wonderful summer interns who help us do that. And one of the nice things is we can OCR all our digital material now, all our reading material. That means you can go in and search. So if you want to go in and type something like Scottow, you can find all the references to Scottow in all of our documents. Occasionally we get wonderful objects like this, which was actually a silver cup, a pewter cup, from a golf tournament that was held around 1900 at the Waskawag Golf Course. Now, Waskawag, of course, means place of much grass, which is the name of Scarborough. And the Waskawag Golf Course was founded by some Prouts Neck people. It was over near the Black Point Cemetery. And the lady there whose land it was had cattle grazing there, and in 1906 she wanted it back to graze the cattle instead of playing golf there anymore. So they started the Prouts Neck Country Club and set that all up over there. But this we just got the other day from Charlie Bradford here, Father Don Bradford, some of you may know. And he found this at a flea market years ago. And it's a wonderful little piece of history, which we then tie into the actual golf events here. And as you can see, women played golf back in the late 1800s and early 1900s when the game was just taking off just as much as they do today. This is a fabulous picture too. This is how they got from Prouts Neck, the 3.5 miles, to that golf course by the Black Point Cemetery in this particular wagon here, and others. But this one especially is a wonderful stagecoach owned by Harris Seavey on the left, driven here by Dr. Nevins Hyde. And you can see all the ladies and others in their finery there, off to attend an event at the golf course. We produce displays at the library. These are interns working at the library, and another one of our friends in the back there is very good at building displays. And some of the things the interns do is create things like this. This is a fabulous timeline, which I had the students working on this year, that goes off the 400 years, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and includes photographs and images from the various periods. We also do our best to preserve a lot of the historical homes out at Prouts Neck. There's about 250 homes out there, and there's about 50 to 70 or so that are really historically interesting. And unfortunately, some like this one, the Gordon Sprague House, and the other one here, the Loyce House, both fell to the wrecking ball this fall, which was really sad. They do try to preserve them, but sometimes it's just impossible because of setback rules, EPA rules, and a variety of other things. And sometimes just people want something different, which is too bad. Some, however, like this house, we are able to preserve. And this is just a wonderful old house that is fairly innocuous. It's in the middle of the neck, but here you can see it. Kind of fun. We're going back here. That is the house in 1909 when the Jocelyn Hotel burned down. That's when all this burned wreckage is here, including this thing that looks like something out of H.G. Wells' War of the World. And that is actually the remnant of the water tower that used to be there. So the top of the water tower is made of wood, and that burned down, as did everything else. This house was preserved and then moved down the beach in 1910. And this house was spared from the fire as well. And we can see it again in this picture a couple years later, about 1911, with some 1910 Model T Fords in front of it, and was later moved up to here, actually. So it was moved from this spot here, over here, over to here in 1943, but my history buffs who go back into looking at the nails and stuff say, no, this was originally over here. They used to love to move houses around Prouts Neck. So they did that in a lot of different places, and of course we're doing that right now with the schoolhouse. So we moved it off the foundation to fix it, and then we'll put it back on the foundation. But in those days, several of the houses were actually moved from their locations down over here, for example, to over here, and this one here in 1943 from here to here. So we were at least able to save that house, which some people did want to tear down recently, but Luckily, we found some people who'd like to preserve that. The Scarborough Historical Society, we work closely with them, of course, and where I am a volunteer. But we also put on some fun events at Prouts Neck. So this year we celebrated, can anybody guess what we're celebrating here? This was Woodstock, 50 years later. So lots of hippies came out of the closet, dressed in their finest. We got a wonderful old automobile here owned by Lee Sprague here, and had a fabulous outdoor movie night and played the entire movie of Woodstock from 1969. And 3.5 hours of fun and entertainment underneath the stars here, and it was really great. We also do presentations like this one here, and I've done these at a variety of various places. I even helped out Scott at Ollie in town.
Thank you.
And one of the fun things we do, a particular one we do in October, is at the end of the presentation, then we have a potluck and folk singing. Again, we're very into the music out there, if you will. But that is a little bit of background about the Prouts Neck Historical Society. So again, we're very digital, and we work very closely when we can with other historical societies, especially the Scarborough Historical Society, since we're really part of that. So we're going to go back to the early conflicts, and this now gets everybody involved, but especially those who lived in what was then known as Black Point. This, of course, is one of the most well-known incidents here, Massacre Pond. We'll come to that in a moment. But again, audience participation encouraged. This October, of course, we realized we were celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. Though some of you may remember Columbus Day. Well, Columbus had his day, I guess, and now it's Indigenous People Day. And if we go back before Columbus, pre-Columbian times, we did have the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and other tribes with various pronunciation. But and 500 years ago, Columbus and his gang arrived mostly down in the Caribbean. But 400 years ago, that's when the settlers really came into this area here. And one of the first was, of course, Samuel de Champlain. This is an amazing photograph, which was taken, I forget, about 40, 50 years ago, when they built this replica of Samuel de Champlain's boat. And he was, of course, the founder of Canada. And Samuel de Champlain came across the Atlantic in a boat just like this 29 times. He was an unbelievable cartographer, explorer. He was the founder of New France and Quebec, and he was a diplomat. He knew how to work with the local populations, the Indians, the indigenous people, whatever you call them. But can you imagine living on these kinds of boats and going back and forth in order to work with the politicians in Europe to get more support for the new settlements in the New World? This is a fabulous map that he did, actually an aerial view, if you will, that shows Prouts Neck on the right. This is Biddeford Pool on the left. This is the Saco River, and this is Saco Bay. This is circa 1605 rather. This is May 1605 that he came along here. And he actually printed this later on, but you can see Stratton Island here. He's parked his boat over here. He's coming ashore to talk to the locals. And you'll notice that the locals are growing, the indigenous folks are indeed already farmers. They are growing things, they have small settlements, and there's quite a few different tribes in the area, small groupings. And this was during a time when things were relatively peaceful. Of course, what were the early settlers doing? The main thing that they were doing was salting fish to send back to Europe. And that was the major business in those days. In those days as well, the relationships with the indigenous folks were pretty good overall, and they could trade an awful lot of things. And things were peaceful, but then not so peaceful. And I find it a little ironic that this is, of course, the cover of the 300th anniversary, 1958, and this is the cover of Scarborough, Maine, 300th anniversary. The Indians getting ready to tear us down. I think politically this may not be quite so correct today. So, I want to introduce John Broll, and Anna Durbin, I think, is right over here. Anna is one of the original founders of the Scarborough Historical Society, I believe, right? 1961, was it? Was it 1961? Which was a great year. That was, by the way, the first summer I came to Maine, 1961. So time that I can relate to, certainly. And I've been very happy ever since. I've always said this was my home. We only moved here 15 years ago, full-time. But this young gentleman, 17-year-old John Brawl, is the new age of history. He is amazing and has done incredible research online. And Linda McClune, who's not here today, we're talking about her, but she's also done a tremendous amount of research into this whole Indian conflict period of the early settlements. And coming back to this again, this is a period, 1675 to 1725. It's about 50 years of some pretty serious conflict between the Europeans and the indigenous folks. Much of it was stirred up by the French, which this is really a rivalry between the French and the English, and lots of European wars that were going on. And they would send their consuls over to Canada, to Montreal, or to Boston, and they would say, you know, you got to do this and that and the next thing. And of course, the French were very diplomatic and very good with the Indians, so they brought them down on several occasions and helped inspire some of these things. Does anybody here know who King Philip was? Raise your hand if you know who King Philip was.
It's an English name for an Indian chief.
There's King Philip. By an old drawing. I'm not sure how old this drawing is and how real it was. I've seen a number of them, but it's kind of a cool one. He was one of the top sachems, or sagamores, one of the great Indian leaders, King Philip. And let's face it, they had a lot of problems by 1675 with all these new settlers moving in. And if you think about the Pilgrims coming in 1620, we're talking about 50 years now of settlers. There were thousands of Europeans living in New England by this time. And they weren't always that easy to get along with the local tribes. And so King Philip here was able to diplomatically then get all these Indian tribes to say, we got to stop these guys. And they started a war that lasted 3 years. And according to some accounts, over 10% of the population, European and Indian, was wiped out during those 3 years. One of his great generals, if you will, was Magagan. Magagan was also the star of John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, which is called Magan here, but who stands that cliff like a figure of stone, unmoving and tall in the light of the sky, where the spray of the cataract sparkles on high, lonely and sternly, save Magan. And Mag was quite the warrior, and certainly the warrior for Prouts Neck, or Black Point. And in October of 1776, Mag attacked the garrison of Prouts Neck. And Henry Jocelyn, who was there, went out to talk to him. They often would parley. And while he was out there, all the other folks in the garrison left. And he came back, and the only ones left were his family. So he was taken prisoner by Mag, who treated him fairly. As again, they were all pretty diplomatic. Some of these guys were pretty diplomatic. And he was later released in the spring. Later, Mag came back, though, and the garrison, they got the garrison, but winter came on, and they left the garrison because the hunting grounds were inland. So in the spring, the settlers came back, took over the garrison, and Mag came back and did a frontal attack, in which he was killed. And he and a bunch of his Indians were killed, and we actually found the grave, where the grave was found in 1885. And the bones were dug up and brought to the Portland Museum, I think they called it. And they've disappeared since then. The Portland Museum no longer exists. It's right where the library is. So if anybody knows anything about those bones, please let us know. So again, 1678, King Philip's War sort of ended at that stage. Here's Magagan. This is Garrison Cove. Oh yeah, here we go. This is Garrison Cove, then out at Prouts Neck. If you drive out there on your way, there used to be a post office, and almost across from that is Garrison Cove, looking out towards Pine Point. And the Dunstan River, as it was called back then, the Scarborough River. And here's the actual sign itself. Headquarters of the First Indian War, Chief Magagan killed here in attack 87. This is what a garrison looked like in those days, apparently. And I've gone through lots of images and such. We're trying to find out exactly what it looked like. This is actually one from Fort Edwards up in Nova Scotia, which is still used as a tourist. Anybody remember this one? Huh?
Yeah.
Does anybody know when it came down? It was torn down?
It got moved up to Smiling Hill Farm.
Oh, that's right. Okay, it still exists over at Smiling Hill Farm. Oh, I gotta get a picture of it over there.
If you took a tour with me, I'd tell you that.
It's on my list. So later on, though, as revenge then, so remember this happened in May. Later on in June of 1677, the settlers brought a group of men to fight off the Indians. And I just want to read this to you. This again is some of the research that was done by John Broll, who goes on the internet and finds things. I'm pretty good on the internet, to put it mildly. I'm very good on the internet. This kid blows me away with some of the stuff that he finds. So, and a late winter, and then finally, a large company of 40 men under the command of Benjamin Swett arrived in 2 ships off of Black Point. They'd been sent by the General Council of Boston. Remember, Boston controlled everything up here, right, as far as the English were concerned, to end the Indian threat once and for all. Swett's company, again, these are all quotes from various books and such that Jonathan was able to go through. Swett's company was soon augmented with a further 50 men from Black Point. It's important. So there were the 40 from Boston and the 50 from Black Point. And together the force of 90 men left to confront the Indians head on. Near Moore's Brook, I don't know how many of you know where Moore's Brook is, there is a fire station on your way out to Prouts Neck, and suddenly the road goes down, and there's a wonderful farm there, and there's a little farm stand as well, and Peggy Harmon is out there. It's just a fabulous little place to go to if you ever like. And that's up here, and there's a little brook that runs by, which you drive over and you never notice. But right there, that's a mile and a half inland from Black Point. They were beset upon by Indians in a great ambush. Around 10 men, including Lieutenant Richardson, were killed in the first volley, which panicked the remainder of the men from Boston and set them running in different directions. These men, in only small groups, were easy pickings for the Indians. Captain Swett led the remaining 50 Black Point men in a ragged bunch back to Jocelyn's garrison, where Swett was felled by a tomahawk just yards from the garrison. Again, these are from first-hand accounts. Of the 50 men who returned to the fort, 40 were wounded and 10 to 20 died of their wounds in the subsequent days. They were massacred. They lost that battle big time. So this was a major battle of the Indian War from 75 to 78. The Indians, fearing the men of Massachusetts would enlist powerful Mohawk Indians in the war on their side, and this was the overall war. The Mohawk Indians were quite feared by the coastal Indians here. They decided to sue for peace, and things calmed down a little bit, but not for long, as we'll see. So this again is where the battle took place, and they straggled back here, and there's some wonderful first-hand accounts of one guy who'd been wounded and hid in the bushes. The Indians were after him, and he could hear them all around him, and the next day he survived that night, and the Indians didn't find him, and he crawled all the way from there, almost 2 miles down to here, to the garrison, where they were able to get him, and he was able to tell his story of what actually happened. So they built a stronger stockade here, Scottow's Fort, and you may have heard of Scottow's Hill, which I believe is also the same Scottow. He was a landowner in this area here and owned Prouts Neck at one stage. Scottow's Stockade Fort, and this was up near the Atlantic House. And then we had the 9 Years' War in Europe. And this again is another wonderful thing about John Broll, is he brings a perspective of European history. He studied European history extensively. So he knew all his European history and how that impacted the New World, and was able to pull in the fact that it was really the 9 Years' War, these European wars, and things like Frontenac. So many of you may have heard of the Frontenac up in Quebec City, right? That's named after this gentleman here, who was an incredible governor of New France, 1672 to 82, and then again 89 to 98. So he came back. They sent him back during this 9 Years' War, and he said, well, okay. He said, I've been sent over here to raise hell with the English. So he did. And here he is, raising hell with the English. He's training his his men here, and I call this one of the early, what do you call them today? Military advisors. So he sent some military advisors along with the Indians down to Black Point, and first they started off with Portland. They arrived down in Portland, Falmouth, which was just a peninsula back then, right? There were 200 inhabitants, killed everyone, man, woman, and child. They were a little deceitful about it too. I won't go into the long, gory details. And they piled them up in a big pile right on where India Street is today, about where Ben K. Sushi House is, if you want to know. And left them there. And he continued on. At this stage then, all the settlers from Maine were leaving. And so everybody left. In 1702, the settlers returned. And the French and Indians were still resisting, though, because we had the Queen Anne's War going on. So during the Queen Anne's War, once again, the French were told, go and raise heck down there with the English. So they did. Once again, in August, we had an attack in 1703 on Western Cove garrison, and this is the plaque for that. And it says here that, this is some fun names here, Captain John Larrabee, Charles Pine, 2 Libbies, and 4 other men withstood a siege by 500 French and Indians. And for years, I grew up thinking, like, 500? How could you possibly do that? You know, with 8 guys, it just doesn't seem humanly possible. Well, again, John Broll was able to do some digging and found out that that wasn't correct. In fact, we found some other accounts that turned out there were 500 being sent down, and they split up into 6 groups, I believe it was, and they attacked 6 settlements simultaneously from Wells all the way up to Portland. And so maybe 70 or 80 attacked the Prouts Neck garrison, but they still were able to hold off. So they were able to hold off at that stage, but unfortunately at Scottow's Fort then in 1703, there was a massacre as 18 guys went out, 20 guys went out and 19 did not return. Massacre Pond. And again, another thing, that was 500, which you now need to correct. So history constantly is changing. We constantly need to go back and look at these things and say, wait, was this really the way it happened? And thanks to the internet, we can now do research across all kinds of documents and such. So if we can get young people involved who can really do this kind of research, it's amazing what they can dig up. In this case, Linda McClune, a strong member of our wonderful Scarborough Historical Society, had done some research and found that this date here seemed suspicious, just didn't seem right. And now we know that it occurred in 1703, not 1713. This is the famous massacre at Massacre Pond. So, again, we should probably go back and correct this plaque here. Here's Linda working diligently on all kinds of incredible ephemera. She's really quite amazing. I just want to show a better picture of Linda. Here we have Anna, Joyce, Sarah Jane, Mary, Charlene rather, and Becky, Delaware. So I think most of you probably know these folks here. Wonderful time here. And this, I believe, was a 95th birthday, Anna? Don't you have a birthday coming up soon? Yes. She's got another one coming up any day now. So that was 50 years of conflict. Anyway, any questions about the Indian period? We're going to go on to modern Prouts Neck, so to speak, now. So now we are going to talk about August 1939. And the reason that this is so special for us is the fact that this wonderful photograph was taken on August 23rd, 1939. Does anybody know what happened 10 days later?
World War II started.
Cheat, you've seen this before.
No, I know the history.
But anyway, World War II started 10 days later. This is a summer community here. This is Prouts Neck, almost the entire neck. There's a little part missing over here. And this is the golf course over here. This is Massacre Pond. And this is the beach, Scarborough Beach, which is about 1.5 miles long. This is Western Beach here, which is about 3/4 of a mile to a mile long. And this was taken 10 days before the start of World War II. This massive hotel here, the Checkley, was the largest in Black Point in the area. And it was a spectacular grand dame of hotels. And over here we can see that the laundry is fluttering, that there are people on the decks, and that there's automobiles coming here. This was one of the last living moments of this hotel, because as soon as World War II started, things got difficult and all the Canadians really could not come. So at the minute World War II started, all the Canadians left, September 3rd, because they needed to get across the border, because Canada was in the war and the United States was not. So for these hotels, it was an extremely difficult time. There's a number of hotels along here, but especially for this one. And this period here, this photograph is so detailed that we can zoom in, and that's what we're going to do in a minute. So we decided to recreate the picture this year, exactly 80 years to the day. And this is my young pal here, Bradley Abbott, who lives over in Higgins Beach. And this is his airplane, which is a 1953 Cessna. So, as we say, he's as old as my wife and just as beautiful. So anyway, we took off from Spurwink Farm over here, dirt strip over here at Spurwink Farm, which is Ram Island Farm, also known as that. And we flew down over Prouts Neck and down here by the Saco River. We actually took on fuel here. But we flew back this way and came back to Prouts Neck, and we're about to fly over it. And on the way, we saw some nice things, but then we're going to take a look at the aerial views and do some comparisons of today versus 80 years ago. So as we fly along here, this should look familiar. Rodney, you're about here, I believe.
Right there.
And we have the Breakers Hotel right here, okay, and the Higgins Beach Hotel over here. And this is the marsh back in the back here, and here's of course the main road going out to 77. And traveling along here. This is not Apple Computer's headquarters. This is Piper Shores. So I think it's pretty spectacular looking in this picture. And if any of you have been to Piper Shores, of course, it's quite a lovely facility. And as we zoom along here, this is where the old Atlantic House Hotel was many, many years ago. And do any of you remember the Atlantic House Hotel? Huh? A few folks here, I hope. I mean, that was a spectacular old Grand Am. It was started in 1850. It was one of the oldest here, but then when the new fire regulations came in 85, they had to put in a whole new sprinkler system, and they just couldn't afford it. So this is what happens a lot of times with the old houses, is new regulations, either environmental or fire code, what have you, make it impossible to preserve. But they did a very nice job, I think, of building some lovely condominiums here. And it's a very nice spot. This is then going all the way to the other side of Saco Bay. This is Wood Island Light. And Wood Island Light, of course, it's even appeared in Winslow Homer paintings from Prouts Neck. You can see this little red flash in the distance. And in those days, I found out just recently, in fact, the light was red. Today, I believe it's been white for some time. But in those days, it actually was red. And as we continue along from the far end down there, we go along here. This is Old Orchard Beach. And as many of you may know, Old Orchard Beach is burned a few times. But by the late 1800s, Old Orchard Beach was full of huge hotels. When the railroads came in, and this is one of Scott's areas of special interest, I know, when the railroads came in, it really started vacation land and bringing in hundreds and thousands of tourists from Canada as well as from the East Coast. Along here now, we're flying over Prouts Neck, and so this is August 23rd, 2019. We can see Prouts Neck, the beach here, going out. This is Higgins Beach over here. This is Ram Island Farm. Crescent Beach is on the other side. This is Richmond Island. This is Crescent Beach over here. This is Cape Elizabeth. And way in the distance here, you can't see it very well in this photograph, but you can in the digital one we've got. You can actually see Portland over here and Casco Bay. It's quite an amazing position. So we spent quite a bit of time going up and down trying to get the right altitude to try to replicate. We've got the photograph, which is on the cover of the book over here, by the way, our first History Highlights book. And a lot of people have got large copies of this in their rooms. Rodney's, you've got one in your office, right? As well. It's a lovely photograph. Yes, Sarah Jane?
Where is the studio for Winslow Homer?
Good question. The studio is a great landmark, and that would be right here. it kind of blends in because it's a little bit green, and over right here is the studio. This is the Ark, which was the Homer family place. And the Homers, when they came out here, they really loved the place. They came first in 1675 for Arthur's, after his wedding, they came here for his honeymoon, the whole family, for a month, and stayed at the Willows over here. And then they ended up buying this in 1882, 83, and built their house in 1884, the Ark right here, which is still there today. And Winslow said, "This is nice, thanks very much, but I'd rather have the studio moved over here," which was just a garage or barn. And that was Carriage House. Thank you. Carriage House has moved here, turned into Winslow Homer's studio, and you can come out there now with the tours from the PMA, of course, today, because this is now owned by the PMA. So we're going to take a close look here in a second and compare 1939 to 2019. This, by the way, is a wonderful map, the 1879 Stevenson plan, where the Libby family laid out the property like this because they were all getting old. This is a farm. It was all owned by the Libbys, the Thomas Libby family. And the children each ended up having lodgings or hotels along here. Everything from what would become the Black Point Inn all the way to the West Point House and the Checkley were all really owned by Libby family members. And they realized that they were all getting older then, and they needed to be able to sell off some of the land here. So they had it surveyed, and they weren't going to put 522 houses here. There are 522 lots. But instead, we're going to sell them in groups. This just made it easier for people to buy land. So they ended up breaking this up, and the Homer family ended up getting much of this land in here. But that's a story for another day. Right now, I just want to take a look at some of the differences here. So this is 1939, and we're going to just look at this area here for a second.
Hey, Phil.
Yeah?
That open area, I always heard, was Thomas Libby's sheep pasture, and that's why it was open and clear.
This area here.
That's right, that area.
Yes. It was definitely a farm. And we really don't have much information about how they farmed it, and that would be fascinating to know. We do know, I mean, the information we have is all once they started renting out to lodgers in the 1850s. And I've heard the same thing, that it was used for pasturing his sheep, and he had cows and horses, obviously. You had to have horses and cows, that's how you got around, and that's where you got your dairy products and such. Matter of fact, Bob Jordan was quite a character, and owned the West Point house over here. And later on, he had a cow, and even in the 60s, he still had a cow. And the cow would every now and then get off its leash and go wandering around the neck. And people said, well, why does he have a cow? And finally we found out the reason he had a cow, and there's photographs of the cow even back around 1915 rather. He had a cow because he wanted to be able to say that his smaller place here had fresh dairy products. We had one cow, and then he brought in his other stuff. But he was an incredible character. In 1964 he passed away, and they've torn this down, so this is just an empty field now. But compare 2019 to 80 years before. And there's a couple of things here you might notice are different. Anybody see, what's the first thing that really strikes you?
Trees.
The trees. To me, the trees are quite phenomenal. And another thing a lot of people say is the number of houses. See, all the houses here, there are no houses really. They're hotels.
And the Checkley is gone.
And of course the Checkley is gone. We don't see that in this picture yet, but yes, we're going to come to that in a second. And the Checkley is gone. These hotels, all here in 39 and gone. They actually, if you look closely here, you'll see there's orchards here, and there are indeed apple trees all over this area now, grown up. You can see all sorts of apple trees in here if you walk around, buried in trees in many cases. And one of the stories I've heard, but haven't had it confirmed, was that Mr. Sprague had a daughter who lived over here and had a boyfriend with an airplane. So he had one of his men go and plant all these apple trees here so he couldn't land his plane at the neck. I happen to like that story. I don't know how true that is, but I could almost believe it for sure. Because they definitely had a landing strip, they still do, over at Spurwink Farm. And to your point, Sarah Jane, there's the Checkley House then. Today, 3 very lucky families have got these houses right on the neck here on this point, which is just spectacular. And this is the Ark, this is the Homer place again. And I'm sure Mr. Homer might have liked to buy this if it was available, but at the time, of course, it was the Checkley Hotel until 1943 when they tore it down. And they tore it down because the kids were playing cops and robbers inside there. And, well, again, that's a story for another day. Here's the Checkley Hotel. Again, you can see the laundry here. If you look closely, you'll see some people on the balcony here and some others over here. And this is what it looks like today. A couple of 3 houses right here. And coming back here, oh, another interesting thing, too, about Prouts Neck is that we're coming in from the north here, and this is the main road. And now we're looking sort of towards the south up here. And the roads on that plan in 1879 and until 1945, right after World War II, September of 1945, all the roads were called B Street, A Street, C Street, M Street, J Street. Very boring names. Today, of course, we have the more prosaic Winslow Homer, Sanctuary Lane, Library Lane. So much nicer names then. But at this time, of course, the early days, it was all the hotels along here and a couple other sites. This is from an 1888 travel book, and it actually mentions the Winslow Homer studio as one of the objects of interest, as well as, anyway, observatory. Let's look at this section over here. These are the hotels along here, all houses now. The hotels, and all along here now, we just have houses. We do have what used to be the post office. So many of you might remember driving down and seeing the little post office, and there was a little shop down there as well, a little general store, which is wonderful to carry on. And unfortunately, in modern times, it became more and more difficult to maintain that. And so they just decided to just make it a private home now. And they have shut off, unfortunately, the post office. It just didn't make sense to run it anymore. Yes?
Where is your museum?
Museum. Scarborough Historical Society's own museum.
Prouts Neck.
We don't have a museum.
Well, what do you call it?
The library?
Oh, my.
The library you can come visit. And there are a few objects there, but we don't have a museum at Prouts Neck. Any objects we have really are stored either at Scarborough Historical Society or are in the homes of various private individuals. Obviously, there is the studio. If you want to see some and learn more about the 1880s to 1910 period, of course, they can talk about that and show you some objects and stuff at the Winslow.
You don't have a special building?
No special building. Closest we come to that is the Charles Thomas Memorial Library. Wonderful guy who died in 1899 and left his little tiny house, which has expanded a bit. And we now have about 12,000 books there. So it's a really nice little library. And it's open during the summer from June until October, early October. But there are certain hours that it's open. And during the summer, it's open almost 10 until 4 o'clock, I think. And that's where the Historical Society, that's where my interns hang out. And I hang out, and we are there to greet people and show them things. So that's as close as we come to a museum. Here's a really nice shot of all the hotels here. The West Point Hotel, owned by Bob Jordan here, the Kamak House, the Willows, and here's the post office, as it was then, and here is the Black Point Inn, which used to be called the Southgate. And before that it was called Kaler, as in Kaler Vale. Mr. Kaler's parents, whatever, I guess, John Kaler started the Black Point Inn. And here's what it looks like today. There's the Black Point Inn still, but now we have lots of smaller homes here and there, all the way along here. This, fortunately, has been kept open grass by the owners here. I hope they keep it that way. I doubt it will stay that way forever, but they're hanging on so far, which is great. Here's a fun road. This is Winslow Homer Road now, going down this way. And this is what it looks like today. And this is the church, St. James Church, which is open to the public on Sundays, by the way. So if you came down here on a Sunday, you could actually go to the little Episcopal church there for the services.
But isn't that a gated road?
It is, but on Sunday the gate is open, my understanding, and you can go to the church services there. So, don't try to park anywhere else though, or gosh knows what'll happen to you. So this is what it looked like in the this is about 1915 actually, and this is what it looks like today. Again, one of the real striking things about Prouts Neck today, which I especially mentioned to Prouts Neck people, is how many trees there are today. How overgrown everything is. Everybody loves trees and they grow them up, and of course then they end up blocking people's view and they become a fire hazard. So, fortunately today we have fire hydrants all the way around Prouts Neck, and hopefully we're going to be getting another one in the middle over here, Rodney, if I've got anything to do with it. And we have had several fires over the years. The Jocelyn Hotel was over here, that burned in 1909. We talked about that earlier. That was a big hotel. Beautiful hotel. John Calvin Stevens design. We're zooming in here on the Beach Club. Beach Club in those days had a little float out here, and you could actually swim out to the float. They even had a diving board. And here you can see that orchard I was talking about here. And now, going back a little bit here, this is 1939. Chippy Willauer and Pam Diamond, who are my favorite people. Chippy passed away a number of years ago, and he's actually the reason we started the Prouts Neck Historical Society, because he was such a historian himself. When he passed away, somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, we have to save the history of these people before we lose any more. And I said, and they said they'd be willing to put some money towards it. And I said, really? You said the magic words. And I said, okay, I think we could do that, and we'll do it digitally so that people can access it from anywhere in the world when they're not here off season as well. And we'll put together a book, and we'll put together a website. And so we did, and then it's continued on then because people have had so much fun with it, especially with the monthly Prouts Necker. Again, I encourage you to sign up over there. These are some wonderful pictures from about 1939. This is Jackson. Benjamin Jackson was a wonderful guy. We've got pictures of him going back to 1899 when he started as a bellhop at the, he was at the Jocelyn Hotel originally. And he then served on all of these at the Beach Club and the Country Club. Everybody loved Jackson, and he retired in 1952. And he's the only person at Prouts Neck that has an actual bas-relief plaque of his head, which is kind of fun. But everybody loved Benjamin. Anybody who still remembers him. Sunbathing with pals. This was the main pastime at the Beach Club, was hanging out and meeting girls. This is all about 1939 here. Of course, during the war, which is about to start, many of these young gentlemen went off to various theaters around the world. And here we have a beach movie, and then I'm going to come back here and take a look at a yacht club movie over here. This is the yacht club today. This is the yacht club 1939, and now the yacht club today. And one of the major changes here was, in fact, this long piece here, which is sticking out, which did not exist back in the early days. There was just a dock here and a very small little piece here. So this was very exposed to the elements. So when they built this, it changed the harbor a little bit. And of course, Pine Point, when they put that pier out as well, it also changed the harbor and the action of the water and what it does to forcing folks to dredge every now and then. This is 1939, down at the docks. Wonderful wooden boats, the O-Boat series as it was called. Here's the loudspeaker here. And here's a typical Prouts Neck chowder, or lobster. In those days they dressed a lot more formally than we do today. This is Charlie Homer, who was the nephew of Winslow Homer, who was an immense figure at Prouts Neck. His wife, his second wife, his first wife passed away. His second wife was Dory Homer, who some of you may remember. And she was quite a figure here in Scarborough, a wonderful lady. And here are a number of young gals at Prouts Neck whose grandchildren today are, well, about my age. And they had some rather dangerous habits back then. This is Godfrey Rockefeller, a wonderful guy, and Tissa Rockefeller, who is still just as serious today as she was back then. But she could certainly drive a motorcycle, and he had a heck of a sense of balance. And we come through those. I'm going to just bounce in here quickly and see, just to give you a real taste, because there's just something magical about movies. And when you see a movie, try that one. There we go. This is 1939 at the beach. One of the earlier color movies, by the way. Notice in those days I had lots of umbrellas. And the clothing and everything, this is 80 years ago. It's surprising, not really that different. Of course, bathing caps were very in vogue and were for many years. You could see people out there in boats. And the seawall was very simple back then. There's also all sorts of concerns today with seawalls and global warming and rising sea levels. But in those days, those were far off thoughts. The houses along the beach still look very much the same today. The bathing styles pretty much the same. And I'm just kind of jumping around here. These are some wonderful movies that were just digitized recently. We found these thanks to the Parkhurst family. And we've had some wonderful donation. This is from the Rose family here. Again, these are all well-known Prouts Neck characters, many of whom have passed on now because they would all be in their 90s or older. This is, that's Herb Pratt. I don't know if anybody ever knew Herb Pratt. Do you know Herb Pratt? You must have known Herb Pratt long ago.
Herb Pratt, they call him Jake.
That was Jim Rose. No, that's a different one. And that's actually Jim Rose along the left there. And Rodney certainly knows Jim Rose. He was the president of our historical society a few years ago when we really got going, and he just passed away last year. And here they are down at the docks, the yacht club, looking somewhat like it does today, although you can see the clothing styles may have changed a little bit. They're still making wieners today. I think they use a gas grill. Birthday cake for Jim Rose. That was his 11th or 12th birthday, and he would have been 93 this year. And here they are playing ping pong. I have no idea what the bunch of bananas is for. That has always mystified me. There's got to be some reason for that, but I'm sure bananas were somewhat scarce in 1939, and somehow they got a whole bunch of them there. But this is a yacht club, and who knows? That is all. Ta-da! So it's about 3 o'clock, time for questions. Yes?
No, I don't have yes, I do have a question.
Good.
I wonder how many people here were privileged to go through Winslow Homer's studio with Doris Homer.
Me.
How many?
Ooh.
Boy, you all missed something.
Yeah.
You know, the Historical Society one year had an old house tour,
Yes.
and Dory put his
The studio.
studio on the tour, and it was a rainy afternoon, and I was stationed there, and my husband Bill Tolman, who a lot of you know,
Oh,
was
Bill.
doing the parking outside, and I had the best tour. That's not the first one I had, nor was it the last one, but we sat there and we had tea, and she took me through the whole house, and she was so generous with both the Scarborough Garden Club and the Longfellow Garden Club and the State Garden Club when we had a convention, our big meeting, our June meeting here. She opened the house for a tour for the people in this thing. She was wonderful. We all lost a good friend when she left us.
We did, and you've just given me an idea for another talk that we need to do sometime, and that is a talk all about Dory Homer. Because Dory Homer was a remarkable woman. On her tours, too, they would sometimes say, well, what was he like? You must have known him. And she said,
One day, she said she had one of the astronauts come, and also other people, and somebody said to her, well, what was he like? She said, what are you talking about? I was born the year he died.
one of Dory's favorite lines. Exactly. But she knew Winslow Homer, and she had the spirit. Of course, she was married to his nephew for many years, and she ran the house, and she's just absolutely a fabulous woman, and very well known throughout the Scarborough
Very
and Portland,
down
Maine.
to earth.
Down to
Very
earth, and she died, I think she was about 97 or 98 at the time. She passed away a number of years ago. She was a huge Pirates fan. She loved her
yes,
ice hockey
she had
Pirates.
season tickets.
Season tickets for the Pirates. Absolutely wonderful character. And thank you very much, everybody. If you'd like, again, the books are up here if you'd like to flip through them. And if you'd like to sign up for the Prouts Necker, if you're interested in getting our weekly, or monthly rather, email, we'd be happy to have you on board. And thanks very much.
I'm glad you came today. Good to see you.